In our last unit, we are going to cover communication of students who are deaf-blind. Let's start off about what we know about children who are deaf-blind. We know that they have limited auditory perception, they have limited visual perception, they have communicative, social, and cognitive needs which parallel those of sighted and hearing children. They have a right to free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. Children who are deaf-blind require observational assessment over time in natural and familiar settings. Professionals who assess children who are deaf-blind must understand and use alternative communication strategies. What we do not know about children who are deaf-blind are as follows. We do not know the extent of their cognitive potential. We do not know the extent of their communicative potential. We also do not know how they innately use sensory information, for example, their touch, smell, taste, along with their residual vision and hearing, to form concepts and make connections between themselves and others. Some fundamental assumptions about the assessment of children who are deaf-blind are: children who are deaf-blind are capable of academic success. Children who are deaf-blind can acquire a complete formal language if it is presented early, consistently, and in a salient communicative context. Children who are deaf-blind benefit from a collaborative, transdisciplinary approach to assessment. Teachers and others should hold high expectations for the cognitive and communicative development of children who are deaf-blind, just as we do of all students. What do we know about the communication of all children? We know that all children communicate and that nonverbal communication acts of children can provide information about their cognitive level, likes and dislikes, and their learning strengths and preferences. We also know that expressive language is dependent on the salient linguistic input, and most importantly, all communication is negotiated. Our primary challenge as educators is to facilitate. We must facilitate independent communication among children who are deaf-blind, their families, and others, using the natural abilities and preferences of the child. We must facilitate independent cognitive abilities, decision-making, self-help, and provide opportunities for consistent use of these abilities. Facilitate independent mobility in familiar and unfamiliar environments, and lastly, facilitate success in increasingly more complex academic and linguistic tasks and social behaviors. Now we are going to talk in a little more detail about the components of understanding communication, which includes the forms, function, content, and context. Forms of communication are the way in which we communicate. We could communicate through signs, speech, objects, gestures, nonverbally, or with pictures. Deaf-blind students may need to use non-conventional forms to communicate, and they may also need to use a variety of these forms to communicate. For example, some students may use sign language and pictures to communicate. The function of communication is the purpose of the communication interpreted by the person on the receiving end of the communication. The function may be to get attention, express joy, to comment on a topic, or to ask a question. The content of communication is the subject, or what the communication is about. It is very specific to the environment and the individual. It could also be a recent event of something of importance to the student. The context of the communication is the aspect within the environment in which the communication happens. So it's the people, places, and things in the past, present, and future. For example, Jane is a teenage girl who loves dance music. During a classroom party where there is music, the teacher notices that Jane moans, frowns, and begins to rock after her favorite song ends. What does her teacher think this means? What would a visitor that walked into this scenario thinks it means? Her smart teacher thinks that the forms of communication are vocalizations, body movements, and emotional affect. The function is to express dislike that the song is over. The content is Jane's favorite song, and the context is the classroom party, and Jane knows she can't play the song over and over again. A visitor to the party might think there's no formal communication being used. Who knows what she's thinking? I bet she's in her own world, and it's too bad she hates parties. So who's right? Communication is complex and depends largely on those who are interpreting it. Understanding communication is also an ongoing process and is based on relationships, experiences, and interactions. Some important things to keep in mind. Communication cannot be taught. It develops by being used, so we must give our students opportunities to use it. Ask yourself, what kind of experiences do I want the child to have? And why would they want to use their communication? What is their motivation to use it? Now let's talk about different communication systems. There are communication books, calendar boxes, Boardmaker Mayer Johnson Picture Exchange Communication Symbols, also known as PECs, real pictures, objects, sign language, Braille, and the Tadoma method. Communication books can be made with real pictures, PECs, line drawings, words, and in some cases even objects. Now that we live in such a technological age, you will also see various forms of communication books on iPad or iPod Touches. The picture book shown above is made of line drawings and some picture exchange communication symbols. This is an example of a board made with Boardmaker pictures. It can be used as a student's schedule, communication board for a specific or general topic, or on a high-tech device such as a touchscreen computer, iPad, or iPod Touch. Object communication is the most basic form of communication. This is where you would start if a student who is deafblind had no formal communication methods. Some of our students will need to begin at this level to communicate their wants and desires. You can also use objects to create an object calendar, so a student can begin to learn their schedule while also increasing their language skills. The Tadoma method isn't often used, but it's important to know that some students who are deafblind may use this method. This is a method where a student places their hands on your mouth and cheek or jawline. You talk as you normally would, and they are essentially lip reading with their hands. Some students who are deafblind may learn Braille as their written form of communication. You see this often in students who have Usher syndrome and have mastered a formal language in both reading and writing, as well as speaking, and begin to lose their vision over a period of time. Braille keyboards have a total of 6 cells. These 6 cells make up the different letter and numbers of the alphabet. Students who are deafblind may use ASL as one of their modes of communication, especially if they have some residual hearing and/or vision. Lastly is tactile ASL. This may also be known as hand-over-hand or hand-under-hand signing. Tactile ASL is American Sign Language signed in the hands of a student who is deafblind.